Hi, I'm Kristen Anderson. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the branch manager at the Ashland Library, and I'm back to talk about more books with you. Um, this month, I wanted to talk about an award list that's one of my favorite award lists of the year. In January, the ALA awards the Youth Media Awards, and there's lots of awards. That's where you see the Newbery and the Caldecott and the Prince, which are the biggies for illustrators, authors, and then young adult. But there's also this one really cool list in there, and it's called the Alex Awards list. And it's not a award. It's a 10 book list that is decided by a committee of librarians. That's adult fiction with high potential for crossover to young adults. And young adults have really interesting reading preferences. When I was a young adult, or a teen, I was reading a lot of Stephen King, and that's just super normal. And so these tend to be really compelling reads with also like characters that are maybe on the younger end of the spectrum, but also with really good, interesting hooks that have interest for folks who might be still teenagers. So I'm going to run down the list that won this year, all of the 10, and I think that's what we're going to do today. So I'm going to start with Bad Cree by Jessica Johns, who is Indigenous, and I'm saying Indigenous because I believe she's Canadian, but this is kind of a mystery horror about a family who's lost a member, and the main character goes back to be with her family after having left after the death. And it's unique and interesting and has some really good representation of experiences that might be different from yours. Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah, which is a mouthful, but his work is really, really compelling. Chain Gang All-Stars is a dystopian book about a televised gladiatorial combat, which is fantastic, and you can see how something like that might appeal to people who have already read and enjoyed, for example, The Hunger Games. This is for an older audience than The Hunger Games, but I first found this author from his collection of short stories called Friday Black. And short stories for teens can be, like, this is when they're reading, like, The Lottery for the first time and some of those other, like, short stories that you remember years into the future having read for the first time because you didn't expect how they were going to end. The first short story in Friday Black is called The Finkelstein Five. It's super dark. Just like Lottery, it's one of those ones that like punches you in the chest at the end, and highly recommend that as well. The fourth title on the list is Chlorine by Jade Song. This is a genre called body horror. It's about a high school swimmer who is convinced that she's a mermaid, and it's weird, but in a good way for people who like. Body horror is a kind of a unique category of horror, and as you probably remember, if you are a teen or when you were a teen, how you felt about your own body and not being quite sure you fit right in it. This kind of has that element to it. Also queer main character. Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros is something that you've probably seen on bestseller lists. It is a category called romantasy, which is a portmanteau of romance and fantasy. It's set in a dragon academy, a dragon war academy. So it's political intrigue and romance and all of the things that romantasy would make you think about. The sixth title is called The Hard Parts, a memoir of courage and triumph by Oksana Masters. And she was adopted from the Ukraine. She was born near Chernobyl and had some pretty severe things about her body that were she had some pretty severe disabilities, and has since though come to be an athlete. So it's a story of like a high-level athlete overcoming early hardship. Another very, very compelling category for teens. Things like A Child Called It, which I won't necessarily be like, yeah, that's the best book ever. But there are lots of examples of books that teens year after year come back to because hardship in childhood is something that teens do like reading about. The next title on the list is I Will Greet the Sun Again, which is by Khashayar Kabashani. And that title is a novel set in Southern California, and it's one of those novels about young people struggling with intersecting identities. In this case, Iranian, queer, so we're Muslim, immigrant, all of those things intersecting in a novel. So I think and a lot of it is going to be about the relationships between the family members, between the relationship to a country of origin and the relationship to the country where one resides, and also in a culture that would struggle with the existence of of queer humans in general. So that is I Will Greet the Sun Again. The next title is called Mame, and that is by Jessica George. And I'm going to pause here and mention that. Well, actually, let me tell you what it's about first, and then I'm going to pause. So this is a book. It's set in England. The main character is the primary caregiver to her father, who is who suffers from Parkinson's, and whose mom is regularly just kind of flying back to Ghana, and so not always present. So it's kind of an unconventional family that has put a lot of pressure on Mame to kind of cede her own needs to those of her father. And this is about her kind of late bloomer discovering life. It's a delightful, kind of heartwarming. There's some hard stuff in it, but there's something very heartwarming about it. And the thing I want to talk about with this book is, while I found this on my own, when I was going back to remind myself about the book, I noticed who blurbed it. And I thought that this can be a really interesting method. I think this is a really interesting method for how to discover books that might be next great reads. In the case of Mame, it was blurbed by Bonnie Garmis, who wrote Lessons in Chemistry. So you're talking about their historical, very funny. You may have come to it through the TV at this point or through the novel. We've talked about it here before. And also Xochitl Gonzalez, who we talked about actually last month, and her book, Olga Dies Dreaming, which is a romance set in New York. And so having both of those authors told me something about this book that now, having read it, I can say those are authors who would probably, if you liked those authors, you would probably like this author. And the best way I know of to find out, like if you like an author, to find out what they've blurbed, there's a website called Fantastic Fiction. It's free to access. If you Google Fantastic Fiction, it will be the first thing to come up. And if you search on an author, if you scroll down far enough, you will see all of the books that they have blurbed, and it'll be in order of recency. So that can be a really, really useful tool if you know you really love an author. Librarians use it all the time to find other books that you might like by identifying authors through who's blurbed what. Pro tip. So also, next book on the list, Starter Villain. Starter Villains by John Scalzi. John Scalzi has a nice touch with humor. This is a kind of a Bond villain kind of story that's going to have a lot of humor told from the point of view of the villain. And obviously with that, all of those elements, it's going to have teen appeal. And the cover, which you're probably seeing right now, has a cat in a suit, which is also like great entry point for teens. And it's worth checking out. I don't read a lot of John Scalzi only because he has some sort of special deal with some sort of audiobook provider, so I can't access his audiobooks through the library. So I'm just saying, I would read him more if I could get to his audiobooks through the library. The Talk by Darren Bell is the next one. And this is a graphic novel, and it's a graphic novel about a talk that many of us don't know about it, but many of us also do. And there is a specific talk that that African American families have, particularly with all of their children, but particularly with young boys, about things like carrying around water guns that look realistic and things like that, how to interact with the police in a way that would keep them safe. This is told from the point of view of an African American man who's deciding whether his son is old enough for the talk yet. He's 6. So his son. So that is this book, and it's gotten a lot of recognition as a top graphic novel for the year. And the final title is one that I know many of us have been talking about here, called A Whale Fall by Daniel Kraus. And this has an obvious hook. This is what makes it so easy to talk to teens about. Like the obvious hook is, it's also horror, which is an easy hook as well. But Whale Fall, in which a young man goes out scuba diving, gets swallowed by a sperm whale, and it's a survival story. There's goo, lots and lots of goo. If you've got, like me, kind of that fear of the ocean, it has some of that vastness to it, but then all of a sudden it becomes very claustrophobic, because once he's inside the whale, it's not about the ocean, it's about being like inside another creature, which has a whole other layer of horror to it. So highly recommend. I know many of us have read and enjoyed that here at the library last year. So those are the titles from the Alex Awards list last year. Those awards have been presented since 1998. So it's there's an array of lists going back. If you've got teens who are, who've maxed out the teen department and are looking for other places to expand, this is a great resource also to use with your teens, but it's also a great resource to use for yourself because of its amazing ability to pick titles that just have really compelling concepts in them. And that's it for this month. Thank you.